What do you think of the state of modern Britain, Peter?
God, how long have you got?
About 20 minutes
Yeah,
in total.
from what point of view? I suppose, just to allude to something we were just talking about before we came on air, the general decline in, you know, our surroundings has suddenly become noticeable.
Yeah. Sorry, John, we're getting an echo. Can we stop that, please?
Yeah. And I've sort of found this because I've been going around the country, different places, and you can't, it's sort of palpable. Fewer people about, and also just dirty streets, tattiness generally, a sense of things not working. I mean, all of this, nothing new, I'm sure anyone who's listening.
I interrupt this segment to bring you an important message about this stuff, the dollar. Not going so well, is it? Inflation is out of control and debt is even more out of control. In fact, the US government is on the verge of spending $1 trillion a year just servicing its debt. It spends about 6.6 trillion and it only collects about 4.6 trillion in revenues. So you can see that this situation is rapidly taking a turn for the worse. You might want to consider some gold and silver, and that is why that we've done a partnership deal with Goldco, and we've created lotuseatersgold.com. Go and check that out. It's an offer for our American viewers. You can transfer a proportion of your IRA into this, and if you do so, you're going to get some of this lovely stuff, some bonus silver thrown in on top, up to $10,000. Or you can even take delivery of the physical gold to your home address if you prefer. So if you want money that goes clang when you put it down, check out lotuseatersgold.com.
But I think that, when you look at all of these sorts of things, even the way that people's demeanor even, then that seems to have actually struck me almost in the past year, I would say. It's sudden like that. And I've lived in London all my life, but I moved out to Windsor a year and a half ago, and people think that, Windsor's this very twee place and everything. It's not twee at all, actually. But, even in, places like Windsor, there are signs of, empty shops. We things that basically people have got used to in their own suburban town centres. It's too easy to say it's just about the pandemic.
No.
I think there's been a general retreat for these very reasons from the public space. I see it in myself. I can feel it in myself.
There's been a general sort of hollowing out of life.
Yes, exactly. And a sort of exhaustion. I would say cultural exhaustion. So what does that actually mean? I know what I mean by that. I'm sure you do, but it's a kind of feeling that there's no dynamic driving society. That and what we've had in the past 3 or 4 years, I would say, is a sense in which people can't even take refuge in the past. Yeah. They can't. Nostalgia is probably a banned thing.
Everything is under attack at the moment.
Yes. So
it's hard to identify where the attacks are really coming from.
Yes. I mean, it's a kind of, from the moment you wake up in the morning, if you're still stupid enough to listen to the Today program, right the way through, it is one long litany of basically why you are essentially bad, why you are at fault. This affects certain sections of our society more, like, say, men or whatever. And, that is never ending. It's incessant. And it will have an effect on the way people. That's why one of the reasons I think they sort of stop having children. I don't just think it is about money and the expense of it. I mean, if you don't feel that there's actually anything in the future, it's a kind of odd subconscious thing. Why would you do something which was about the future?
Why can't we feel optimistic about our own futures? It's very hard to explain why the decline is happening. And no politicians, no pundits on TV, no one ever tries to give you an explanation. I talk to taxi drivers quite a lot, because I think taxi drivers are an interesting barometer of the country. Because at some point, everyone has to get a taxi, right? And the taxi drivers I speak to are always just like, yeah, this country's going down. And I ask them, well, do you ever see anyone trying to explain it? They're like, no. It's inevitable.
Well, no, but the reason I think for that is that we're not meant to think that it is going down. We're meant to be actually, living in some kind of nirvana.
Yeah.
And it's essentially, therefore, you have to sort of, there's a sort of thing now called vision crime, I think, that you sort of look at something and say, that's not right. But actually, everything is telling you that this is absolutely fine and that, in fact, it's better than ever.
Well, that's very much what the Conservatives are trying to pretend, isn't it? I mean, I just remember Liz Truss saying, I think Britain's best days are ahead of it. I think they're gone. But one of the things that I think is something that will help with this is actually going back to understanding what made us good. And I think that virtue ethics made us good, which is why, if you want to support us, go over to the website and go and check out Stelios and I's examination of Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics, which I think are just the root of all of the virtues that Britain has had, basically. Doing the right things for the right reasons, for the right amount of time, with the right people. These are all things that are important, and it is not just in one realm of life. This is a thing you need to think about for your whole life. And it's one of those things that just you would never get this kind of conversation in an educational situation. Like in schools, in academia, you wouldn't hear about it on TV. And yet this, honestly, the reason my life is way better now is because I decided to essentially just do what Aristotle recommended.
Right.
Just try and be a good person in these ways. And it really worked for me. And so I totally recommend it for other people.
When you say works for you, Carl, I mean, do you mean it changes your general attitude to things?
Yeah. Primarily to understand that you should do all of the things you like doing, but not too much or too little, I think is a good way of actually reframing your entire life, because too many life plans are in some way really restrictive, right? Oh, you should never eat this, you should never do that. And it's like, no, you should. There's a time and a place for all of these things, but you should do everything essentially in moderation. And this is an old phrase that the British have used for many years because it's true. You shouldn't be denying yourself the pleasures of life, but also you shouldn't be doing it all the time.
Yeah.
There's go out once a month with your friends and go drinking. That's totally fine. In fact, it's part of the good life to have all of these things. And actually, I think that one of the things that Zoomers don't have these days is access to the good life, because they don't have friends. They don't have friendship circles in the way that when we were young, we absolutely did, because you couldn't just spend all your time on the internet. You didn't have that option. If you wanted to have fun with other people, you had to go out, and that was important. But anyway, so that's what I think is the solution to our current woes. But let's have a look at our current woes. So there was a recent poll by Ipsos Mori, I believe it was, where they asked people, well, do you think Britain's getting better or worse? And 76% thought Britain is a worse place to live, compared to 49% in June 2010, which is when the austerity years began, and 71% in May 2008 as the financial crisis hit. This is reflected in people's opinions on politics, obviously. Nobody really approves of any of our politicians, although Keir Starmer is the most approved of because he hasn't become the Prime Minister and screwed everything up yet. But even then, only 36% of people see Keir Starmer as the most capable man to be the Prime Minister. So 2/3 of the country are like, no. I mean, it's 3/4 of the country that say no to Sunak.
I mean, actually, how much notice do you even take of Westminster politics? I take very little. I mean, I was asked the other day to go on something, and just simply was like, what do you think of Rishi Sunak? Do you think? And I sort of thought, I don't care. I don't care.
I don't think of Rishi Sunak. Yeah,
yes, exactly. Yeah. But don't. Seems a perfectly nice guy.
I'm sure it'd be nice to have a barbecue with. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But I mean, really, it seems beside the point.
Yes,
that's the point.
Yeah. I wrote something about this on Twitter the other day. It's clear that there are forces at work that are just beyond national government at this point, and none of the people in charge have got the stones to challenge these forces. And so the governments just feel like regional managers Like Rishi Sunak feels like the regional manager of a McDonald's. Everything he presents in the sort of CBeebies presenter voice. And it's like, look, I don't take you seriously. I don't really think you're in charge. You don't have the gravitas or the energy to make me think that you're the one who's really pulling these strings.
Yes.
But it's not just me who thinks this. I mean, 79% of people are dissatisfied with the government. Only 14% of the people in the country are satisfied with the government. I'd love to speak to some of those people. Sorry, what exactly are you satisfied with? Like, what around you do you think is at least as good as it was 5 years ago, if not slightly better? There's absolutely nothing. Fewer than half the country think that Labour are ready to form a government, obviously, but none of the above are essentially in a commanding lead at this point in British politics, which is typical.
Well, the thing is that the general caliber of these people is rock bottom on the whole. I mean, you don't have to be a Thatcherite or think that Thatcher was right to look at her cabinet. I mean, I watched a couple of really good documentaries about Thatcher, and they had these cabinet ministers, former cabinet ministers on. And the fact is, they were people with some seriousness about them. They'd had, or sometimes wartime experience still by then. And you sort of felt that they had earned a kind of place. When you look now at the people who make up our Westminster village, they are very, very low rent. And also that it's interestingly that actually that happens as well when the institution, in this case Parliament, is no longer seen as being as meaningful as it was, which is one of the I mean, essentially when institutions go, well then, why not just have this person in, or why not just let this person become leader? Why not?
I mean, like I said when I was on Twitter the other day, and I asked people, well, look, just name a politician who you think understands the problem and who you think could devise a plan that would produce the intended results. I can't think of one. I can't think of any. They're all, like you say, low rent is a great way of describing them.
I think the other thing as well, I mean, there was a piece by Alistair Heath in The Telegraph yesterday. Alistair Heath said, he's the editor of the Sunday Telegraph, and it was a piece basically going through all the various points about what's wrong and why the Tories, in his case, have got to grapple with it. But it was pretty good and also very thorough for The Telegraph, which is, after all, part of the establishment media. And I was rather taken with it because, I mean, it was, all of these things you say, he went through everything, the woke ideology gradually taking over, the culture wars, all of this, as well as economic. And basically, and the general malaise, basically, no politician will really go to any of those points. And I see it reflected, like, I no longer have a TV. I stopped paying my license 2 years ago or whatever, but I did see BBC recently because I was at someone's flat. And the actual news, I watched the news, and it was the weirdest thing, actually, Carl. It sort of felt quite banal. I sort of thought, wait, there are huge amounts going on. And yet, wait a minute, I'm watching something which seems very, very sort of...
it seemed like stage managed.
Yes, sort of stage managed, but also of no real consequence.
Yeah.
And this was local news as well. And I just was thinking, well, perhaps because I spend all of my life in these waters, that this is actually me, but I don't think it is.
But even then, why aren't these waters what the BBC is talking about? Because I feel like we're actually further ahead of the curve than most. We're talking about real things that are quite impactful. And for some reason, the BBC is essentially giving people some kind of political sedative in order to make sure that they don't think anything's wrong as the world crumbles around them. And it's not just the fact that, of course, the government and the political system, it's becoming apparent that everything we have is actually just junk now. Like, we have arrived in the era of badly made products. There's a quick quote from this that I think just summarizes it. People don't exactly want to pay more for all that stuff. So what has to happen if everything is more expensive and consumers still want to pay the same price is that something has to be cut. And often that's going to be the quality. Even though designers may say, oh, this is just as good, the components themselves are increasingly plastic instead of metal, using glue instead of screws. There's some definite design trends that are making these things not work for very long. Yep. Everyone can see it. And we've, of course, outsourced our manufacturing to China, which isn't exactly reputed for their engineering finesse. And so the things we have are becoming of worse quality, and the places in which we live are becoming of worse quality as well. Turns out that our houses are just terrible, poor quality housing. But look at the framing on this. Well, poor quality housing is costing the NHS 1.4 billion a year in treatments. Maybe I'm not worried about how much it's costing. Maybe I'm worried that we live in a junk heap.
Yes.
Maybe I'm worried that there's something wrong when we live in squalor. You know, I don't even care about the cost of the NHS, but apparently 11% of the houses in this country, that's 2.5 million homes, are of poor quality and contain more than one Category 1 hazard under the Housing Health and Safety Rating System. I have no idea what that even is. And this, of course, is costing the economy money. It's like, but there's something about the fact that it's humiliating for us to live in a collapsing civilization.
Yes, with the housing thing as well, the houses that are being built, say take London, the houses being built there are being built almost entirely for single or maybe couples, young couple, professionals, no kids.
Yeah.
You know, and they're all luxury. You see, but you know, the idea that there should be a family home is basically something which is sort of disappearing. So that's what's being built at a massive and grotesque expense. I think the thing is with living in squalor as well is that, I mean, you're talking about actual structural faults, are you here?
Both, actually. The not only is the house just generally not very pleasant, but the houses themselves are of just poor quality. But again, like this is 2.5 million people, according to one think tank, of young people 18 to 34 who just live in poor quality houses, defining homes that were not in a good state of repair, where the heating, electrics or plumbing, not really in full working order. There's damp present. They're living in very, houses that were old family houses that have been portioned up into apartments now. So they're living in smaller living arrangements, and everyone can see. And you get just things like this, just on Reddit and places. People notice. People come to this country and like, oh my God, why are the houses so terrible? Like, why is this the case? I mean, this person's like, look, if I go to France, Germany, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, the houses are better and cheaper. Why is it terrible in the UK? And no one knows. No one has any answer. People speculate, but that's, I don't know.
Decline in engineering skills, for example?
Quite possibly.
I mean, you know, I've often thought that when it, not just this, but even in, I remember, this is a long time ago, but when Terminal 5 opened at Heathrow, I think it was, and then it basically nearly had to close again the same day because it was just it was just a screw up. I mean, nothing worked. And I did think at the time, maybe we're seeing the kind of coming through finally of the complete deterioration in education in schools, that people just simply don't know enough anymore. They don't have skills enough anymore. But I think maybe that's a bit of a stretch to this story.
Quite possibly, but I don't know. And I can't say that there isn't some kind of long-term knock-on effect. And even if that isn't the reason for this now, it will be the reason for more of this in the future.
Yes, people can't make a decision. They haven't been taught how to make a decision anymore.
It's not even that. The standards and pride in the work is all gone because nobody's proud of the country, because the country has been so debased in the eyes of the media, the politicians, the educated classes who are always talking down to them. There's no reason to be proud of anything around you. Right?
Well, there's no reason. I think that's the difference between, the poll, going back to the poll you had there. I think you mentioned 2010 was the one that there'd been a big rise in people thinking Britain got worse. Well, I mean, you've just alluded to it there, but since then, we've been through, well, for me, which was an absolute low point, would have been 2020, during that pandemic thing, during that disastrous lockdown. And then in the middle of it, we had outright attacks on everything we were during the BLM time. And I remember that was the time where colleagues of mine, family members, really thought that that was it. That the level of, things were terrible all around us because of the pandemic, but then there was nothing, even our very foundations now we were being cast adrift from those.
The statue of Winston Churchill being defaced.
Exactly, and statues being pulled down. Every museum you came across coming out with the same thing, decolonization, the British Museum, British Library, Kew Gardens.
Yeah.
I mean, it went on, and it's still indeed going on. But that, of course, it's going to make people feel that countries, well, it's because, a lot of people will think, well, actually, we're not what we always thought we were.
Yeah. Well, we're not what we used to be.
Yes.
Like, I remember in living memory when this country was much better, when we had self-confidence, when we were happy to do things to a high standard. But that was the Britain I grew up in.
But the funny thing is, though, the difference is important, is that in the 1970s, I'm sure you're too young to remember that, Carl, but I mean,
I was born in 79. So.
Right. Well, in the 1970s, trust me, it was grim. Right.
That's what my father says.
It was very, very grim.
That's why he's always been a Thatcherite and not a Labour.
Right. You talk about, I've just been going on about, it sounds like I'm about to contradict myself, but in a way I am. But when you talk about the way that things look, the way that maybe Swindon looks now, the way that London looks, wherever, all the time, and you sort of think, boy, has things have ever been as grim as this? Well, actually, the 70s, you've only got to look at old footage if you weren't around then, or even the movies of the time, and basically it was kind of, it was terrible. It was grim, like the aesthetic was terrible. It was, brown and grey and everything very, very...
Everything was run down then as well.
Incredibly run down. Yeah. Didn't have so much graffiti and all of that, but, things were run down. Yeah. And it changed, whether you like what happened or not, but it certainly did change. The absolute amazing shift that happened between the 1979 and around about basically 10 years later, just a bit before that, it was extraordinary.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't great if you were a minor. I'm not saying that, or,
sure.
Or whatever. But you talk about an idea of decline not being inevitable, that was the period.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding. I was in the Tory party at that time and very active. You felt that you were on the winning side, and Britain was standing tall and all of this. One thing I think Thatcher was remarkable at, without wanting to digress too much, is that, even though she never had to actually get into the culture wars, because they didn't really exist at that time, or so they thought, she did single-handedly kind of bring the country up in the eyes of other people.
Oh, yeah. She was always... I've seen loads of speeches of hers where she's just saying, no, we're British and we're better than you. But it's just the framing of it.
If I can just finish that point that I was making in a very laboured way there. The 70s were like that. However, it didn't feel as depressing.
Yeah.
Simply because we were culturally intact.
Yeah.
It was economic.
Yeah. And it felt like change was possible, right?
Yeah. You could, yes. Well, you could line up and be socialist. You could line up with all the massive unions at the time. You could, very honourable, actually, when I think, the unions.
Compared to now.
Yes, compared to now. Or you could have been a capitalist. But the big argument was, should we be a socialist society or a capitalist one? Now, that sort of, well, it might be making a bit of return, but it's not really a question, not in a serious way. And yet, culturally, we are all over the place and completely fragmented, but we weren't then. We weren't.
Let's carry on with how else Britain is bad quickly, shall we? What about the NHS? We happy with the NHS? Nope. 47% of British people think that the NHS will get worse in the coming years, and that's only because they're looking at recent history and saying, well, it's got worse now, hasn't it, up until this point? 5 out of every 6 British respondents saying the health service is overstretched, which is more than any other country surveyed. So yeah, not kidding, because the number of people on waiting lists are 11% of the population. 7.5 million people are on waiting lists in the NHS in England. That's mad, isn't it?
It's incredible.
Like, this is a service that's not functioning. Why is it not functioning? Well, I think one reason is just going to be simply the sheer number of people who are allowed to claim it.
Yeah.
Because, of course, last year, the Conservative government allowed 1.2 million people to come and live here in perpetuity.
Oh, I mean, look,
Madness.
whether it's the NHS or whether it's housing.
Oh, well, let's talk about housing, actually.
Yeah.
This is very interesting. I checked these. You can see there, I'm just asking, well, do you have a link for this? Isn't it interesting how 72% of Somalians in this country have government houses? That you pay for 3/4 of the Somalis in this country to live in a house. Why is that the case?
Yeah.
Why are they here? Why are any of these people here? Why am I paying for a single one of these people to live in a house? This is mad, right? This is billions that you, the British taxpayer, pay for recent immigrants to live in government housing. And we wonder why there's a decline.
Yes.
This is your money. This is why you're poor. This is why you can't afford this, right? And so, of course, this isn't exactly breeding a wonderful social environment. Here's just literally something I found this morning, popped up in my feed, which is just awful, right? 2 drug dealers got jailed for stabbing an aspiring lawyer to death in northwest London. The aspiring lawyer was Sven Badzak. Good old British name, that. He got attacked by Rashid Gedel and Shiro Ambersley, who mistook him for someone else and murdered him because they thought he was someone else. We don't have to live like this. We shouldn't have to live like this. This is awful. Why are these people here? Why are they doing all of these things? But anyway, right, well, let's keep moving on, right? So it turns out that your cost of living is up by 20% or so, food. So that's a fifth almost. Your food inflation has gone up, and it becomes evident that the people advising the government, the economists at the Bank of England, have been like, look, the era of cheap food is an end. So your house is rubbish, your streets are dangerous, you're paying for foreigners to live in this country, and you are going to have trouble feeding yourselves. So you're probably going to have to find a job, right? Well, I mean, you're getting on a bit, but have you considered just being a takeaway delivery driver in your 50s? Like, isn't that a bit humiliating? That's the job that teenagers should be doing. And the government are just like, well, the work and pension secretary is like, well, just be a Deliveroo driver. No.
Quite an extraordinarily stupid remark to make, isn't it?
But it just shows you the expectations and the level of consideration that the people of this country have. So no, you should be looking for. I know you're coming up to retirement, but you're probably poor because everything's going badly. You probably live in a crap house, and you're probably just really desperate for money. So why don't you spend your weekends delivering pizzas to people who need them? Like just do it. But this is the low aspirations of this country. That everything has come into what I've just called the decline, right? And so I wrote an article about this because I think that you can see it in the people of England. You can see it on their faces as they're walking around. Because I took Peter Boghossian to a local cafe, and I was just sitting there and just watch them walking around. And he was like, yeah, I see what you mean. Like they just look beaten down, right? And then, I mean, it's just everywhere. Like this is a really interesting TikTok. Whereas this kid from London, or chap from London, who just comes to Swindon, and he's just like, my God, why is this all so run down? Yep, that's a great question. Can you skip about halfway in, John, just so you can see a bit more of it? So you can see the streets. A bit back on that. Sorry, about halfway back. Yeah. So you can just see, just the general tattiness of everything. And we'll leave that playing from it just because it's just utterly depressing. And it's like, okay, why? Where are we going as a civilization? What are we doing? Like, it didn't used to look like this. That used to be a market that used to be open every day, and it was full of things, and now it's closed.
Also, I mean, I was in Norwich recently. Norwich, which is right out on a limb,
Yeah.
and it's not a harsh, gritty urban place. But even that was sort of tidy. It's usually you can tell from when you come in from the station.
Yeah.
And you come into the station, and things are not quite as they sort of should be.
Yeah.
Down at heel. People look bad. I mean, I don't want to. I'll probably regret saying this, but I mean, no one cares about how they look anymore.
Nope.
That is a sure sign of basically when basically things are kind of collapsing. You don't care. You simply don't care. It's just your own comfort that you're worried about.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the premium book clubs, this one on Julius Evola's Fascism Viewed from the Right. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.